when we think about pleasure, I think, we often think that pleasure is only sexual pleasure, but that's also a big part of, I suppose, what we are promoting. And then that pleasure has to be earned in some way by working very, very hard. And I guess the third myth that we're really trying to I suppose, dispel is the fact that, pleasure always has to be costly, or you have to be in some way kind of rich or have lots of money in order to experience pleasure.
Welcome to the High Vibration Reset. My guest today is Lizzy Noone. Now, Lizzy describes herself as a forever curious, clumsy, flawed, left-handed human being who loves people, art, theatre, music, swimming, hiking, camping, and being in the community and life. Lizzy has spent most of her working life as a global citizenship educator who is on a simple quest, and that is to ensure that all 8.5 billion people have basic needs and access to pleasure. Now, this is a very inspiring conversation, and if you want to make sure you don't miss any of these conversations, please make sure you are following us. Now, let's get into the conversation with Lizzy. Lizzy, thank you so much for joining me on the High Vibration Reset.
Thank you, Ciara, and it's lovely to see you. And delighted to be here as well. And thank you for inviting me to the podcast today.
Brilliant. And Lizzy and I were in school together, so we go way back. And I was really excited to catch her on social media recently with some of the work that she's doing. And Lizzy's always doing interesting work. And we will get into, Lizzy, your real work in global citizenship education, because that's an important subject as well. But I'd love to start with the question that attracted me to you this time. What is pleasure activism?
In a nutshell, I would say that it is really about experiencing pleasure that's not on the back of extraction and exploitation of people or our planet. And I guess that ties both subjects together quite well as regards global citizenship education and pleasure activism, which was kind of born out of more or less the kind of same movement of our connection with people and our connection with the planet. We feel as pleasure activists that we should all have the right to experience pleasure. And I guess if we were to look at it to dispel, I guess, some of the myths that we're looking at, when we think about pleasure, I think, we often think that pleasure is only sexual pleasure, but that's also a big part of, I suppose, what we are promoting. And then that pleasure has to be earned in some way by working very, very hard. And I guess the third myth that we're really trying to, I suppose, dispel is the fact that, pleasure always has to be costly, or you have to be in some way kind of rich or have lots of money in order to experience pleasure. And we feel, I guess, today's society and with the way that our politics and our economics has been run has almost kind of brainwashed us into thinking those three myths. So I guess, like, as activists and people who love pleasure, us pleasure activists feel, that activism in the first place doesn't have to be, chaining yourself to the doll and being, very serious all the time. That it's something that the act of, experiencing pleasure for free with others, with community, is actually a form of activism itself.
Amazing. What does the word pleasure itself mean?
Oh God, that's a really hard question. So it is, I guess, if we were to think about the difference between pleasure and it's like pleasure is almost almost more about kind of the process of enjoying things in the moment. And not like kind of maybe thinking of like that it has to be an output or it has to lead to a destination, I guess. So it's really, you know, there's quite a tie up really with happiness and ultimately, you know, the more pleasure that we experience in our lives, the more we can experience kind of more long-term happiness. But yeah, that's a very hard question. I don't think we've ever really thought of the exact definition of pleasure.
But
Um,
I think
so
so.
I'm
I've
sorry
just
about
looked
that.
it up here, and often with the, you know, the old meaning of a word has a very different meaning.
Yes.
So the word entered the English language as a noun to mean to please.
Hmm.
So the Latin word means to please, give pleasure, or be approved.
Hmm.
Okay. And then it shifted in meaning to the feeling of enjoyment.
Yes. Yes.
So, and also there's the sensual pleasure. And as
Hmm.
you mentioned there, often when we think of the word pleasure, we think sexual. And
Hmm.
even when I put it into ChatGPT, that was the first thing. ChatGPT went down that route of sexual pleasure. But there's nothing wrong with that either, is there? And why?
Absolutely not. And actually, you know, if I think back of, I guess to maybe explain where it came from and where I guess the Irish contingent of pleasure activism came from. First of all, it is a book by, Adrienne Marie Browne, called Pleasure Activism. And we were inspired by her. But I think, you know, so we were a collective that were working together on a project for creativity and change, which is a course by Munster Technical University down in Cork. And creativity and change is about marrying, I guess, our global citizenship education with our creativity. So our collective started working on this project. My inspiration for this was Why Women Have Better Sex Under Socialism. So also a book, but also a podcast, and also The Politics of Pleasure, which is I guess around like critical hedonism. So there was a kind of a couple of I guess inspirations that we had as a movement. Our first, I suppose, activity that we had when we came together as a collective was to hit the streets of Cork, where we spent the afternoon speaking to the people of Cork about what brings them pleasure, what brings them joy, and we had a couple of activities around that and conversations around how I guess we can work as a community to experience pleasure together. What we found, we also had some research as part of that. And you know, one of the main findings of that research and that activity was, in fact, when it really it comes down to it, people's source of pleasure and joy were not things connected to consumerism, or not things connected to materialism or anything like that. They were their friends, they were their community, they were their family, there were the swims in the sea, they were the walking in the park. So it was all when really they were put on the spot to think about of the
Mhm.
things that they enjoy most. It was the things that are natural and that come free to us. So I guess after our like huge awareness project, which you can actually, there's some bits of it on our Instagram there as well, but we're really, really happy, and I'm very happy to be contacted to find out more about this. And we have like a playlist as well that you can find a lot of the podcasts that were our kind of inspiration for this. And we're particularly four of us decided to kind of, I suppose, take the movement a little bit further. So last summer we would have worked at various festivals doing workshops, and that's kind of continued throughout the year. We were at Cork Fringe Festival, at Féile Solas. We're at Electric Picnic again this year. And I guess in the workshops, the way that we would approach it in the same way, in a very fun, interactive way, where we're kind of starting with that question of, how we experience pleasure, but also kind of looking at the barriers as well. And then looking at how we can create, I guess, in communities, a third space where everybody has access to pleasure as well. So much of it is about social justice, because it's about, and particularly my inspiration around why women have better sex under socialism, would be the fact that if we have very robust public services, if we have very robust, say, employment laws, if we have very robust ways and safety nets for people, it gives them more time for them to experience pleasure. So the time and the space allows people to experience pleasure that are not necessarily costly and not necessarily, connected with, I suppose, conspicuous consumption as opposed to creative production, which is what we would be promoting as well.
Fabulous, because stress and tiredness prevents us from feeling pleasure or thinking we have the capacity to pursue pleasure. So you're saying if we can take a lot of that stress and maybe even chaos out of people's lives, that there is more space. Now, you also mentioned, Lizzy, that one of the books that inspired this, and then you mentioned, the Irish contingent of pleasure activism. So what have you noticed that's very different in the Irish context or the Irish culture, that there is a real need for us to realize maybe we deserve a little bit of pleasure?
Yes, yeah. And I guess I just described the roots of our own kind of like how this came about for our own particular collective. But if we kind of look, if we look way, way back, and I guess this has had an influence on how we perceive pleasure in our Irish culture. And particularly when we draw on the work of the critical hedonism in particular, which is very aligned to what we do, and we actually work kind of closely with them because we have similar goals. And they trace it back, really to religion and religious reform, where I guess in many belief systems, we are, I suppose, told to restrict our pleasure, and pleasure is scarce. And that in order to maybe experience the heaven or the next world after we die, we need to deprive ourselves as much as we possibly can from pleasure. So we would almost say the same for, say, something like capitalism, where the way our economics run, that it's the scarcity. That's something, in order for some systems to work, things need to be scarce. And that's certainly, pleasure has been put in that place. So I guess in Irish society, yes, I think it could be possibly to do with and it's not a criticism, but because there's so many good things we have from growing up Catholic, say, or being predominantly Catholic. But we have also been told that, to feel guilty or to feel shame around feeling pleasure. And I think particularly for women, we would like that is the case, that we're almost, it's entrenched in us to feel guilt and shame around experiencing pleasure. As I suppose time goes on, so that's kind of in Ireland, maybe the roots of those kind of internalized guilt and shame, they can act as massive barriers to us. We are often conditioned to view our pleasure as kind of unimportant, even as women, I would say, like, and to look after, others and deprive ourselves of our own pleasure. But I think in today's the kind of more kind of secular society in Ireland, I will never forget. I lived in America for a couple of years, and I returned in, I think, 1998. I got a huge shock in, I'd only been away for a couple of years, and it seemed like everybody was competing to say how many hours a week they worked. So it was like, I've worked 60 hours a week. I've worked 50 hours a week. So all of a sudden we were in this, towards kind of the Celtic tiger almost,
Yeah.
that we were, competing with each other on how busy we are and how much we worked. And I think as a result, we forgot to, we forgot the reasons why we were working so hard.
Yeah. Yeah. That's really interesting. And I want to go back to a point you made there as well about, I made the assumption that we restrict pleasure because of our religious history and the patriarchy and all of those things. But I never considered it from an economic perspective. In other words, scarcity is a measure of value. So the less we have of something, the more valuable it is.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. And
so
also we, I suppose in a society as well, that, uh, with the growth of, say, advertising and marketing, which ultimately sells sex and desire to us, like, and say, if you buy this product, you will be more,
attractive.
attractive and everything. But I think what happened with all of that is then all of a sudden, like, our society is connecting their access to pleasure with materialism and buying this product because this is going to make me more desirable. So I guess that's kind of going back to the kind of conspicuous consumption idea, and it's tied in with that we're constantly buying stuff in order to either make ourselves feel better and more desirable, or, to almost kind of show off that we have, this wealth, or we have stuff, forgetting that actually when the nuts and bolts come down to it, that, you know, again, back to those, the people of the street in Cork and every single workshop that we've done, is that the real sources of pleasure are the ones that we find in really, really, like, it's like life's little pleasures, I guess. If we think of all of those sayings, they're very, very true.
Exactly. So in our core, in our heart, we know
Yes,
where it lies. We know what brings us joy, but we're being conditioned away from that.
we're being conditioned away from that to suit, I guess, the narrative of our present kind of economic model.
Yeah. And as you said, if something doesn't have an output or a goal, or, if we don't produce something, what value is it?
Yes.
So again, it's all of these messages that we're receiving to say that there is no reason for us to pursue pleasure other than selfish reasons, other than reasons that will make us feel guilty, because we should be directing our attention to other places.
Yeah.
And what you go
And
ahead.
also, I guess it's, I think we've kind of forgotten. I mean, I'm sorry to be making kind of sweeping statements, but I think in general, we've kind of forgotten how important our connection with other humans are. Um, in my kind of work as a global citizenship educator, I've done a lot of work with, like, particularly secondary schools, but I guess if you look even at the curriculum now, which is really, really welcome. So they have like a well-being curriculum, but one of the indicators that is in that well-being curriculum is connectedness. And I guess, you know, the more that we're connected with other human beings, the more that we're connected with our community, the happier we are, and the more, the more pleasure we can experience with others, I guess.
Yeah. When did that happen, do you think, in our society? And I know this mightn't be your remit, but, that we became such individualists. Like, we close our doors. We don't want our neighbours dropping in. And again, I know this is a sweeping statement, and there are lots of people who like their neighbours dropping in. But we have become very insular.
Mm-hmm. So I guess it was really it was slow, but if I guess in the 1950s and the 1960s, there was quite a strong public services places and everything. And then I guess early 80s, if you think of like the Thatcher Reagan era, and I know this sounds very political for something that's like, but this is, I suppose, the background to how we think. And with the birth of, I suppose, neoliberalism, we really, I suppose, like our society and our economics and was started being built around the individual as opposed to communities, and communities being together. I'll maybe give you one example, which is quite sinister, really. So in today's era, we all know about climate change, and but and we all know, we're all very aware, say, of our individual carbon footprint. So the carbon footprint was an idea that was, I suppose, promoted by British Petroleum to deflect from their own very, I suppose, questionable contribution to climate change. So behind, I guess, even our activism has been, told that it's the individual who does this. If you look at, say, at the moment in our very dry weather, which is unusual, there's a hose ban, and we're told, not to hose our gardens, and to report our neighbours if they're hosing their gardens. And yet there's data centres all over Ireland who are using 30% of our water, and we're not questioning that. So nobody is telling us to question the bigger stuff. It's our fault. It's our responsibility. It's we're almost conditioned to say, look after your own, instead of let's look after everybody else. And I guess it's back to that definition that I gave you at the start. Pleasure activism is very much about experiencing pleasure without extraction. So without extracting too much from our planet, but also about exploitation. So without unnecessarily exploiting other people, and whether that's in our local community or whether it's like, the way out in the wider world where we ultimately get a lot of cheap labor, and we ruin other people's land on the back of it. Sorry, I know that sounds very, very, very serious, I suppose, but it was, and I particularly find it interesting in Ireland how it's slowly crept up on us, because that's not us. That's not us. It really isn't our values as an Irish culture to be so individualistic. So what's happened? And I said I would put it down to purely economics and political systems, that we've kind of lost any kind of sense of looking after each other.
And it's sad, really, and I even see it in my own shopping habits.
Mm-hmm.
I have to stop myself from buying from, we won't mention any brands, but that are coming from very far away and that are very cheap.
Yeah.
Because I need a new, pink top.
Mm-hmm.
My need is greater than the damage that might be being done to the planet, to societies in lesser economically valid countries, or I can't think
Yeah.
of the right word there, but
Yeah. Yeah.
and if I do that, I try and justify it to myself.
Absolutely. But, at least, Ciara, you're critically thinking and questioning about that. And I guess, for both pleasure activism and global citizenship education, it's about critically thinking and questioning how our world works, and questioning also sometimes our decisions. It's a shame that it's also, it's always based on maybe on what we consume or what we buy
Yeah.
or what we purchase. But, that's also where we are at in the world. Something that's quite interesting though, and kind of given that, we, it would be our goal, not to extract or exploit, and particularly from what we could kind of collectively say there's no good term or not, the global south. But two very interesting examples of countries, who have done it differently. So, um, Bhutan, like about 10 years ago, they decided to change how they measured success in their country. So we all use a measure of like gross domestic product. And that's what we measure, so everything else goes out the window in almost every country around the world in order to increase our GDP. They decided that actually that's not a good metric, because that doesn't really give any indication of, like war can contribute to very high gross domestic product, so there's very negative things that can contribute and make your gross domestic product look better. So they decided that it would be the gross happiness index. So instead of the happiness of their people was the success of how well they were doing in life. So that's really kind of changed their policies. So another really, really good example is Costa Rica. Now, I'm not saying that either of these examples have like a perfect society and that there's zero poverty, but certainly it means in, things like sustainability, happiness of their people, provision of public services, they're held off a lot better than some of our European or even us, as regards like, how well people are doing. So the other example would be in Costa Rica, where they have a higher life expectancy than the United States, but a quarter of the income. So why is that? If they have quarter of the average income of America, why is it that their life expectancy is better, and that they report kind of better as regards sustainability, etc.? And it's purely down to things like after their civil war in the 1940s, they stopped military spending completely and invested more in education and health. It's not rocket science.
Yeah. And what about the Scandinavian countries? Because they
Yeah.
have is it called the Global Happiness Index? Or
Yeah, they would be the high. Yeah, so Finland would feature quite high. Sweden would feature quite high. Again, it is down to how well they look after their people and how well you promote the sense of community, how well you promote, that, I guess, we're like, one of our, I suppose, things that we would be advocating for in pleasure activism is, that allowance of space and communities for people to come together, for free, maybe, a place where people can gather, that it's not like, a pub or a coffee shop or anything. It's a place that people can create together. And we've very few of those spaces. So, I'm not saying that it's all to do with what the state can provide, because I think if we're, um, those, those things are being created by people anyway, you know. Uh,
and
so
do
it's,
we see a correlation with the female representation in government
Yeah.
to the nations that are happier, because obviously the Scandinavian countries have a very high female representation,
Hmm.
and Ireland, which I, in a previous podcast, anyone interested should listen back to Brian Sheehan, CEO of Women for Election. We have an abysmal percentage. We are number 27 in the EU 29 for female representation. I mean, it still, makes me feel sick in my stomach how, for such a great little nation, have we such a poor female representation. And it seems to be, that females do this better, this global citizenship, or that we are a more collective, of a more collective mentality.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And well, provision hasn't been made, and we all think that we've got it sorted as regards gender equality, and that it's all out there. And one fun fact that I've been, I suppose, saying for many years now, when I ask, say, students or teachers or whoever we're doing kind of workshops with on global citizenship education, what is the percentage of females in the Rwandan parliament? And people would be like, oh, it's probably just 1%, because our stereotypes are so strong, at thinking that everything is oppressed and corrupt and poverty stricken in the continent of Africa. So Rwanda actually has, in the last kind of 10 years, now there's various things that have contributed to that, but they've had between 50 and 60% women in their parliament. Now, still, as I said, fairly low, but that's, there's colonial reasons why they still remain in, fairly much like, the way poverty. However, their like education and health services have improved like tenfold, as a result of having just equality within and like kind of an equal voice within Parliament. So it makes a massive difference. Yeah, Rwanda 60%, Ireland 23%, is it right now? So it goes between 23 and 25, doesn't it? So yeah, whoever is kind of making the decisions. But again, I think it's back to we are socialized as women to like, be the carers, be the unpaid workers of looking after people, and often that doesn't really serve well in a quite a male dominated arena like politics.
But we're also, I think, being led to believe that we have to stop that, because
Yes.
we've started to come into this world where we need to work, we need to still look after everybody, look after the kids and whatever else, aging parents, and
Mm-hmm.
and the message is look after yourself first. And yes, we do have to look after ourselves first, but we try and do too much. And then I can see this when a lot of the time when I coach women, it turns into this over giving, turns into a resentment.
Yes. Yeah. And it turns into a resentment. Completely right. And I guess, like, I think one of the kind of going back to, and actually, hold on, I'm just looking for her, for the author of this book, which is brilliant. Yeah, it's Kirsten Godshee, but she would argue, I guess, and it's not only about, I don't believe, like, just to make it very, very clear, I'm not kind of promoting one economic model over the other or political system, because I don't think we're even there yet. But her research, and very, very, good research, would say that under, so she would have done a lot of research in Eastern Europe, but under, I suppose, like socialism and communism, there was childcare for free. There was canteens that, served really good, cheap food that, if people didn't have time or whatever, that they could all go. They could also gather as communities there and eat together. So there was much more time. It was much better for women could go to college very easily, if needs be, because there was free childcare. So it's things like it's the provision of, those kind of public services that are dwindling and dwindling and dwindling and dwindling. And we've seen it with the housing crisis as well. That, really, if we build a very robust political and economic system that's supporting this, and I'm sure nobody would mind, contributing to that, so that allows the time and space for us to have a proper work-life balance. And I think particularly as women, as I said, we're run kind of ragged, doing many, wearing many hats and having many roles within that.
So we can stop validating ourselves by the 60-hour work week.
Yes.
And how hard we've worked and how busy we are, and start valuing that. And actually, was it this morning or yesterday? Yesterday, I was speaking to somebody and she was saying how little work she was doing at the moment. And I was saying, sure, you've worked for that company for years.
Mm-hmm.
They know your worth. And just because there's less work now in the summertime, you shouldn't feel guilty about that. You're
Mm-hmm.
showing up doing your job. So it's okay to, take that little space or that little break. You're not doing anything wrong. Oh, comes back.
Yeah. And it's like
feeling.
so much of it is like tied up with like labor laws as well. So I guess like the more like robust as well our kind of legislation, and we have fairly like okay legislation as regards employment law as well. But the acknowledgement of companies that, like, the more that you look after your employees, the better they're going to work, the longer they're going to stay with you. And again, it's not rocket science. And I know one of your questions had been like, around kind of leaders and high achievers. And that would be one thing, one message I would definitely have for those. And it's important that we hold on to that. Like, we hold on to, I suppose our collective bargaining as well, hold on to our unions, because they ensure that, like, our employment laws stay in place. Just to mention, I guess, I work for the Irish Development Education Association, and we're like a small team of people who support Global Citizenship educators, and we're a member organisation. But I know as regards, it really, I suppose, practices what it preaches as well, of like, a good work-life balance, really, really nurturing everybody that works there as well. We still work and work very hard. But we also, like, the way make sure and hold each other to make sure that we have that proper work-life balance. So I guess, the workplace, even though it's not all about the workplace, is also that. I guess the connection, and I'm sorry, Ciara, you probably were like, I didn't expect an economic podcast here. But like I would kind of follow a lot of movements that would be like work, have really good examples of, and have really good models as well, and towards, maybe a better model. But one is like the well-being economy, and that would certainly, as well as, promoting not exploiting and extracting from a global level, it would really promote, say, things like the 4-day week. It would promote, say, things like, say, volunteer, that maybe, like, we should be working maybe 4 days with the the company we work with. And one, we may be paid 5 days, but one of those days is, at your discretion to work at any part of the community that you'd like to work with, whether that's,
Yeah.
whether it's with the tidy towns or whether it's, I know, personally, I kind of, like kind of community murals, community creativity, say, or community drama, with youth, or, working with young people, through scouts and things like that. But that we'd have that kind of like system where, it was a balance that you work, but also that you work within,
Contribute to your community.
the greater good. Yeah, exactly.
And I think it's important that people are not scared by the topics of economics and politics, and it puts people off. And I don't know, not many people know that my primary degree is in economics and politics. So this is right up my alley.
Good.
But also it's about making it real, making it, understand that this is what's running our lives, and we need to have that awareness and educate ourselves around the decisions that are happening that are impacting our lives.
Yeah. And as you know from studying economics and politics, is actually not. Sometimes I think, it's been made kind of overcomplicated for us not to access it, so people don't bother with it, I guess. And actually, that's quite the great thing about pleasure activism. It's very, very accessible to people because it's very, we're asking very, very kind of simple questions of people. And just to, I guess our aim is for people to critically think and question about, oh yeah, hold on a second, why amn't I experiencing pleasure? Why amn't I, what are the barriers to me, accessing pleasure as well? And where do I start, I guess, as well?
So there's a great question that you've just asked yourself. Where do people start? How do we start to, even because I know a lot of people will say to me, I don't know what brings me joy.
I found that question so interesting and almost so
sad.
Yeah, sad in a way, like, that I guess, this morning is quite an example. I was up early and really I should have been preparing for this podcast a little bit more. But the tide was in, and I know everybody doesn't live by the sea, but that's one of my sources of great pleasure, obviously, and it's free and I jump into the sea. Everyone has a space to go for a walk or, a space where they can. So even this morning as well, I was doing some, like a little bit of painting, but they're the things that and even though I think we kind of, time is a bugger. Like time could be kind of the root cause of why we don't do a lot of things. But sometimes you need to just throw caution to the wind and just go, I do have time. It's going to take me 5 minutes. Even if that's not your bag, because I know everybody's probably like, oh, she paints and she swims and she, and go, ugh. But it's sitting down with one of my favorite things is coming down in the morning and making myself a little cup of coffee and, just sitting with it. And having, just being really present in that moment. I also love to dance and I love to like go up we very close to us are the Mourne Mountains, which we've looked at from Skerries all our lives, but it's only in the last, say, 2 years that I've been really going up there. Very, very accessible to anybody's fitness level, and they're beautiful. And you can find so much joy up there and so much nothing if that's what you want to be, if you know what I mean. We often, I guess, on the like kind of creativity piece, because as I said, I would paint, I would cook and sing and dance, and play the piano and everything, but they're done badly. I'm not saying that I'm an expert. We are conditioned, I think, from after primary school in particular. In primary school, we have all this, like, we're our primary teachers are painting with us and singing with us and everything. And then literally as soon as we enter second level education, we're like, oh, only if you're a really good artist. Oh, if you're really good music. And again, it's about the lack of destination or output. It doesn't, it, you can paint a stick man and have a lovely,
Have
lovely
fun.
time. It's not the point. It's the process of doing something that brings you pleasure, but not necessarily thinking, I am really bad at this. So I'm really bad at most of those things, but I don't care
There's also that
because
connection,
I've had a great time.
but it's that connection of coming into the moment. So it's any of these activities bring us very present, don't they?
Yes. Yeah. Very, very present. And I think, I feel kind of, I've only kind of given very kind of individual examples there, but equally, my sources of pleasure would be, now I haven't done so much of it recently, but say myself and a friend of mine during lockdown, we set up like a community mural project where we just would literally turn up and say that we were turning up, and it was outside, so we were able to social distance, and we just invite the community, kids, anything. It didn't matter what they painted on the walls, that we'd just paint on the walls, and it turned out so beautiful. But it was that coming together and the human connection to it as well. Equally, we have and everybody has, I'd say there's one in every town now at this stage. We have a Palestine solidarity group, and every Saturday we turn up in the square at 3 o'clock, and it doesn't, nobody's kind of going, oh, you weren't here last week or anything like this. If you turn up, you turn up. And at 3 o'clock, we have a couple of chants, we have chats, and we ask people to continue their support for Palestine. So and some days it could be like, oh God, I've so much to do. And it's 3 o'clock now. And then you're like, no, this is a half an hour out of my day. And
So,
you go down and you have a lovely time and you connect with people who are 3 years of age and 80 years of age, and you're together.
and I think it's a great thing. It's finding something or some way of helping others
Mm-hmm.
can really uplift us.
Yeah.
And I remember attending a seminar when my boys were still in school on mental health for teenagers. And the guy who delivered the talk said he had never met a depressed teenager. He was a psychologist. He had never met a depressed teenager who was involved in volunteering.
Oh, wow.
So if they
Yeah.
were in, the Red Cross or some kind of outward focused activity,
Mm-hmm.
it wasn't all about them. It wasn't all about their pain. And I think that's a really good lesson for the rest of us because we've become so self obsessed. And even in this pursuit of pleasure that we're saying here that pleasure is great, pleasure is okay, we should pursue pleasure.
Mm-hmm.
But also if that seems maybe inaccessible, maybe start with looking at who can I help?
Yes. Yeah. And who can I
Yeah.
connect with?
Yeah. And the one of my favorite terms is the African philosophy of Ubuntu.
Mm-hmm.
I am because we are.
Yes.
And again, that's something that always gives me goosebumps. And it's that remembering that we're nothing alone.
Yeah, we really aren't. And it really, I think, it really takes you out of yourself as well. And it really helps you, I suppose, prioritize where you are in, and where your space is and where your place is in the world as well. Uh, and
Absolutely.
exactly back to, why, um, it's brilliant that our kind of education is moving on a little bit, like our mainstream education is moving on, just a little bit at a time of like, having that, encouraging connectiveness with each other as well. I guess another kind of thing that we kind of draw on as well is that there is, a lack of like, I suppose, touch as well. Like, and I don't mean just, a sexual touch, but like, the opportunity to kind of hug people and to be kind of beside people. And, so we've lost that sense as well of, we've become quite almost more inhibited now, despite the fact that like our kind of, I suppose, our world looks over sexualized almost, like, but then for just like, holding hands or like, hugging one another has become a little bit restricted.
Yeah. I give my grown-up sons their daily dose of oxytocin, whether they want it or not.
Yeah. Yeah. So true. So
So they
true.
have to receive their mammy hug.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Whether they want it or not.
Whether they want it or not. They pretend they don't, but I know they do.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
But
So in terms of then moving forward, what's the message you want to leave people with for seeking more pleasure, for starting to allow themselves the space to explore this?
the first point is really, and it may be like writing it down. It may be like writing a little message to yourself. It might be verbalizing it, but just have a proper, maybe like write a little list of the things that really bring you pleasure. So what's your gut telling you that brings you like, a lot of pleasure? And I suppose starting with that and go, that realization as well and going, oh, so allowing space for it. I guess, it's not like you kind of schedule it. It is more of a mindset of thinking, okay, um, what will bring me joy today as well. And starting off really, really small as well. I guess kind of tying it together with global citizenship education is also kind of finding for yourself what you really connect with, what you find is maybe unfair in the world that you'd like to, like a cause is, and that cause can be anything. It can be the plants, it can be the bees, it can be people, it can be, and there's so many movements out there that you can be part of as well. Um, and then that's, I guess, like, pleasure activism is as much about like, finding those movements, being part of those movements, enjoying together, as well as like, it's like it's like kind of matching what you're passionate about with your, say, your hobby or your gift or your talent or what you enjoy doing. And then you can use that to, I suppose, like, propel you forward. But I'm trying to think now, is there, I think as well, we kind of have to get away from thinking, sure, it's well for some. That's a real Irish saying. Because we do, I think, if I think about, I remember my dad said to me years and years ago, because we were all talking about like what we'd do if we won the lotto or something like this. And he said, well, why don't you try and make that happen anyway? Because we were all, and I'm not talking about big, wealthy material things. It was more like, I'll study this or I'll do this when
Or I'll travel here
yeah,
or
or travel here, so how would that look like if you were to just, maybe think about, not waiting. And I guess that's it ties maybe some of the reasons why we delay pleasure. Like it's always, you know, in the future, it's always when we retire, it's always when we're dead and when we're in heaven. So we're not, that's when I will experience pleasure. And that's far too late. And I guess personally what has propelled me into kind of enjoying every single day and being, now I feel like I'm a preacher, but like enjoying every single day of my life, is that like one of my really dear friends died when she was 49, 5 years ago and 4 years ago. And she was an amazing, talented, creative, beautiful, healthy person. And one minute I was at the rave in the woods with her and at Electric Picnic, and 6 weeks later she was dead. So for me, Catherine Sorg, um, thank you for giving me the gift as well of really, not that I wasn't like that already, but just feeling like every single day of my life I'm going to enjoy to its fullest, because like, that's what she was doing. And it was, we just don't know
Yeah. Yeah.
when
So
that's going to
important.
happen. Sorry, Ciara.
Not at all. I mean, and that's what it is. And we need those reminders. We need those reminders that, we have a short life and we don't know how long we have. So we can't delay
Hmm.
our lives, our pleasure, or, our goals until some date in the future, because we don't know if they'll ever come. But
Yes.
also, I think what's really important is to remember that our joy, our pleasure impacts positively those around us. Because for me, joy, pleasure is raising your vibration,
Hmm.
and that impacts your vibration, impacts others. So we're making that positive impact in the world.
Yes. Yeah. And it's, I suppose, fully experiencing the moment of all your senses and emotions engaged, and just a reminder of our humanity, I guess, like, and our, like that. And I guess every single person in the world is creative. I don't care. It's not like, you're creative in all different kind of ways. And I suppose it's to tap into that creativity as well. Um,
So listen, we will put links to, if we can remember, the books and resources that you mentioned, your playlist. We'll put links to them in the show notes,
that would be
and
great.
a link to your next workshops. Hopefully, you might get some listeners from the podcast showing up. But
I know there's gazillions, I guess, that I haven't really said. But I guess, if continue to critically question and think about the world and how it works, um, and continue to do that, but to help, I suppose, people find ways to really transform their own kind of desires and pleasures in ways that make the world a more kind and sustainable and just place as well. And maybe one leaving thought, which is very, very simple, is just be kind to each other and say hello to say hello to a stranger. Hug a stranger if that's, next step. So maybe the first
if
step
you
is saying
dare.
hello, and then, asking permission, obviously, and hug a stranger, and, connect with somebody new as well. We're all, and I remembering that we're all humans, and nobody is really inherently bad. And always kind of remembering that, I think.
Yeah, yeah. So just be kind
Just be
and enjoy life.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
With each other, though. Not as an individual.
Absolutely. Thanks a million for joining us, and keep doing the fabulous work that you're doing.
Thank you so much, Ciara.
I hope you enjoyed that conversation. You will find all of the resources and links that Lizzy mentioned below in the show notes. Make sure you check her out, follow her on Instagram, and I would encourage you to try out something new. Really, the message today is about living your life fully and experiencing more joy and pleasure, which I would say is our birthright. So let us know what you start new, and I look forward to hanging out with you next week.